Hello, welcome back to Main Street. I am your host, Jacqueline Timmer. I am here with my tea, no coffee today because last week I broke my mug and spilled it all over the floor. So new mug, tea, we are here. Today we are talking about the border crisis. And yes, it is a crisis. So in just a moment, we're going to cut over to an interview that I just had the privilege of having with Luis Cornelio. Luis is an immigrant from the Dominican Republic, and I've had the privilege of working with him on a number of projects. So we'll get over to that in just a minute, but first, a quick recap of last week. So last week was a little bit more of a lecture, I'll admit. It was dealing a lot with constitutional history and our fundamental structure as a nation. And the reason that I really wanted to dive into that for the sake of this show as we are moving forward and dealing with real-time news is to contextualize where I'm coming from and really where we're coming from as a nation. Because when we were founded as a democratic republic with a constitution. So actually I would say a constitutional republic and use democrat as an adjective, but that's getting a little nitpicky. So with that, what I mean by that is whenever you have a pure democracy, it's essentially two wolves and a sheep deciding what's for dinner. My dad says that all the time. What it is it becomes about the pure majority enforcement and the pure majority will. And so we talked about Jacques Rousseau and kind of the ideologies of where that comes from and how it expressed itself in the French Revolution. And then we also talked about how the term democracy is being used as a political buzzword today by the far left in order to legitimize their agenda in bringing forth certain legislation and policies that are actually detrimental to the American people. And the reason that they're detrimental is because they enforce an agenda in the name of the common will or the common good, but it actually removes protections for specific individuals with whom they disagree with. So we've seen this narrative come forth when it comes to House Resolution 1, when it's come to minority issues and the agenda of Black Lives Matter, how these popular ideas and this current rhetoric is actually removing the protections of the minority groups. If we remove the Bill of Rights, if we degrade the Constitution, if we centralize governance, what we do is we prevent the security and protection of individual persons that disagree with the majority. So we summarized all of that in our last episode. And again, the reason we did that is because as we're moving forward, dealing with political issues that are in real time, such as the border crisis or House Resolution 1, we're looking at it from that founder's perspective, as well as how it's impacting people today. But with that, how is this playing out in the context of what our government was intended to be? And what is this overarching narrative that's moving us in a completely different direction? Are these things connected? Are they not connected? So that's really general overview of how we're exploring these topics. But really quickly, before we get to the interview with Luis, which he did a phenomenal job. I love Luis. But before we get to that, which is really, really great, so make sure that you stay. It's important. It's really important. We're going to head to some news clips.
Last month, more than 100,000 migrants were stopped along the southwest border. And right now, there are more than 16,000 unaccompanied minors in federal custody.
Do you have plans to visit the border?
Not today.
Well, look, I guess I should be flattered. People are coming because I'm the nice guy. That's the reason why it's happening. Look at the crisis on the southern border tonight. The president putting his vice president in charge of fixing the problem.
Because she's the most qualified person to do it.
After weeks of denying requests from the press to see where unaccompanied kids are being held, the administration led a small group of press on a tour of an HHS shelter they picked.
We are getting a look at the conditions inside a Border Patrol facility for unaccompanied children.
And what's interesting, in the background, Senator, is chain link fence. That green stuff back there covers chain link fence.
We met 9-year-old Justin and 10-year-old Joseph, little boys who traveled all the way from Honduras.
They're by themselves.
How long have they been
¿Cuántos años
traveling by
tienen, mija?
themselves?
She's 10 years of age, tu hermanita? 10 years of age and 8.
They have no family with them. The group they're with, strangers, took them in along the way.
So this new surge we're dealing with now started with the last administration, but it's our responsibility to deal with it humanely and to stop what's happening.
The president of Mexico disagrees. This is happening because of Trump. He blames Biden.
Expectations were created that with the government of President Biden, there would be a better treatment of migrants. And this has caused Central American migrants, and also from our country, wanting to cross the border, thinking that it is easier to do so.
The president doesn't think that's what's happening. Now the pressure is on the vice president.
I said when we became a team and got elected that the vice president was going to be the last person in the room. She didn't realize that means she gets every assignment.
The Customs and Border Protection Facility in Donna, Texas, I was there, is at 1,556% capacity right now with mostly unaccompanied minors. There are kids that are sleeping on floors. They are packed into these pods. Is what's happening inside acceptable to you?
That's a serious question, right? Is it acceptable to me? Come on.
So as we all can see, despite the fact that the Biden administration has tried to prevent media from going to the border, there is indeed a border crisis. Nancy Pelosi says there's not. Biden blames it on the previous administration while also taking credit for being a nice guy. There are so many different narratives taking place that are not actually addressing the issue. And this issue isn't a race issue, it's a humanitarian issue, and it's also a public health issue. And now Kamala Harris has been put in charge, and I think a lot of us are wondering if she is the right person for the job. Well, actually, we're not wondering. I personally am not wondering. She is not the right person for the job. She has advocated for open borders. And that, again, has so many policy implications that make it completely unsafe to both the American people as well as the Mexican people and people from Central America. So what we have right now is we have this push of people to cross the border based on a false promise, based on a false hope. And we've seen this before, the false hope that came with the Obama administration, and now a false hope that's coming with the Biden administration. And we have the largest surge at the border that we have seen in at least 20 years. So now we're going to cut over to an interview that I had earlier today with Luis Cornelio. Luis is an editor for El American. He is also a contributor for Got Freedom, the 501c4 that I assisted in founding, and we've been able to work together. He's an amazing guy, immigrant from the Dominican Republic, and has a lot to say and a lot of information on the border crisis and immigration at large. So we're going to cut over to that interview right after this break. Hey Luis, it's great to have you on today. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you for having me, Jacqueline.
So Luis, we've spoken obviously before. We've worked together on various projects. Let's see, I have so many questions for you. And I'm just gonna try and dial it back so that I don't throw them all at you like I do in team meetings. But how did you become a conservative? I mean, you're super passionate about the US, super passionate about policy, articulate it better than most people I know. And we both work in politics. So where did this passion come from?
Yeah, so I grew up in the Dominican Republic, where my grandfather used to watch documentaries about World War I and World War II. And the main idea that he used to hold is that, look at how great the US is, that we're able to win this massive war against these tyrants and people who are, guilty of committing the most atrocious crimes against humanity. And that's where my passion for politics first began as a young boy watching documentaries with my grandfather. And the premise of my conservatism actually comes from my pushback against this identity politics notion that Hispanics and Latinos hold the same values and hold the same vision. So
Yeah. So elaborate on that a little bit more, because I think, cancel culture, it's and identity politics, those are terms that we throw around a lot. I mean, how have you seen that practically play out in the Latino community, and how has that impacted you? What's that look like?
Well, so cancel culture is it's a very unfair movement. I have a bunch of Hispanics friends on Facebook, and when Pepe Le Pew was canceled, I still have a bunch of my friends who happen to be conservative Democrats, and they do not hold conservative principles. They were calling out the cancel of Pepe Le Pew and Speedy Gonzalez, and how people are sort of like being offended on behalf of other people. I don't think Latinos really care about whether Pepe Le Pew was behaving inappropriately in a cartoon show. And I think the premise of Pepe Le Pew was sort of kids that type of behavior, it's not acceptable. So it's pretty shameful to see how a group of people are arguing on behalf of the Latin community, which I think does not appreciate cancel culture.
One of the things, thank you. One of the things we're going to dive into a little bit today, we have kind of two primary themes that we're diving into. One is the border crisis, which is definitely interesting as I've been watching different footage and coverage. There are a lot of Latinos and Latinas speaking out saying we need more secure borders, stronger borders. However, that's not how things are being represented in the mainstream media. And that's not how Latinos and Latinas seem to be represented in the mainstream media. So we have that whole element. And then along with that, the far left is definitely using the race card a lot. And that can be really controversial and really sensitive. Because there isn't a desire to offend over racist issues and issues of racism. However, we're seeing this with the shootings and whatnot, and how it's being labeled with the race card and then manipulating populations of people. So when we're looking at that with cancel culture, I mean, are these issues that connected you with the political movement? How did you get tied into politics? What has that looked like? And then we'll transition over to the border issues.
Yes. So I used to be an intern at the Heritage Foundation. Prior to intern at the Heritage, I graduated cum laude from the Colin Powell School in City College of New York. And, I always held conservative principles, conservative values. And, attending college in New York City could be and while holding conservative principles,
pretty
could be
precarious.
A very controversial. So it's a tough issue. That's how sort of I got interested in politics, and, being an intern at the Heritage Foundation, I was given a whole different perspective on politics and what it means to be a conservative. Because when I used to take certain classes, I used to disagree with some of the politics and some of the theories that professors will teach. And I would just be unable to express, how I felt and my underlying principles. So being an intern at the Heritage Foundation provides, strong, basic underlying principles and how to defend myself and how to explain my policies. And then after Heritage, I started working for the re-election campaign of President Trump as a law and order researcher, where I wrote articles on the nation Supreme Court and President Trump's second-term agenda in terms of law enforcement.
Now, with your work with the Trump campaign, you were heavily immersed in his immigration policy and immigration issues. Would you mind speaking about that a little bit and comparing that with the current administration's policies and the impact that that's creating?
Right. So it's no secret that President Trump was heavily involved in protecting the border. President Trump, when he first announced the campaign, he announced that he wanted to protect our borders, and also he wanted to have the best people in our country. And that includes people from Mexico, people from Guatemala. But he just wanted to ensure those people are coming into this country legally, and that these people are being vetted before entering our country. There is a huge contrast between the Biden administration and Trump administration. President Trump, for example, implemented what is called the Remaining Mexico policy, which pretty much allows people to be processed while they wait in Mexico. The Biden administration has recently abolished that policy, which is why you certainly see a huge surge of undocumented immigrants coming into the border, because I think the messaging from the Biden administration is that the borders are open. And President Biden made it clear in the campaign trail that if he were to be elected, that he was going to be soft in immigration. And that has sent a message throughout Latin American countries that if you enter this country illegally, you're not going to get deported. President Biden in the campaign trail promised that he will stop all deportations of all undocumented immigrants for the first 100 days of his administration. What type of message is that? Now we see coyotes taking advantage of that policy and sort of persuading people into spending their money, because crossing the border is not cheap, and you have isms and coyotes persuading people to spend their savings, to sell their houses, to take loans, to pay them, and risk their lives in crossing the border illegally. I'm very empathetic to the people who are crossing the border. It's not an easy path. The women are being sexually, assaulted while crossing the border. People are dying. I think earlier today, there was a 9-year-old girl, I think, drowned while trying to cross the border illegally on a river. This is an extremely dangerous situation. It's a humanitarian crisis, if you ask me.
So what we're seeing, and I'm going to echo this back to you, and feel free to correct me, is, we went from a Trump administration that was very, very tough on illegal immigration. There was the implementation of the wall. There were some changes in policies, and some of which, we've talked about that you disagree with, and some that you do agree with. So very tough on immigration, and we're moving into this Biden administration, and now what we have is we have no more deportation. We have the removal of Act 42.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Sorry, there was a delay. So we have the removal of Act 42, and then also with that, we're returning to the catch and release policy. And so with the catch and release policy of the former Obama administration, what that does is when immigrants come into the U.S., it gives them a court date in order to be able to have their hearing as far as, the green cards or whatever their application is, and then it releases them into the U.S. But statistically, many of these immigrants were not showing up for that court date. And so what President Trump had worked out with the country of Mexico was that those individuals would stay in Mexico while waiting for their court date before they were brought into the U.S. Biden revoked that policy. So as you said, it's just creating this, there is an open door, the U.S. is open. It is a surge like we have not seen in over 20 years. And you spoke about this being a humanitarian crisis. I mean, I was watching video earlier where individuals along the border were talking about the coyotes, how they're taunting the border control, how they're taunting kids, United States kids across the river, how families and young children are coming over with tags and instructions on their clothing because they are being trafficked or used to create distractions as drugs are being smuggled. So there's this issue that's going on at the border. What do you see, Luis, as being the response of those in power, whether Biden or Kamala or those in the House, the House or Senate? What is the response of leadership?
Vice President Kamala Harris, for example, was asked whether or not she was going to visit the border and sort of assess the current crisis. The vice president laughed at that question and said, something between the lines of like, haha, not today. That was a pretty shameful response, because there are people who are currently suffering. There was a border agent spoke to the Epoch Times, and he told them that as of right now, there are children who are actually sleeping on top of each other in these holding facilities because of the lack of bed. The same agent said that the holding facilities smell like urine and vomit. And he also said that whether there is COVID-19 or lice, disease will actually stay in the holding facilities. So it is a very sensitive issue, and it's a pretty shame to see the Democratic Party sort of like dismissing the current crisis. Speaker Pelosi is another example. Said that there is no crisis in border, and she's whatever is happening in there, it's being handled by the Biden administration. Well, my question is, if the situation is currently being handled, and if there is no border crisis, then why did the Biden administration ask FEMA to come in and help them take care of some of the kids who are coming into this country alone without their parents?
And why is there a media gag order?
Indeed, I thought that the White House said that this is the era of transparency, and in opening the door to press, as if President Trump was not open enough to the press. President Trump, whenever he had access to the media, he loved speaking to the American people and speaking to the media. So it's been remarkable to me to see the current administration, the administration of free press, to put that in quotes, prohibit the press from entering some of these holding facilities. But listen to this. The press was recently actually given access to the facilities. However, they're not going to be given access to the facilities that are currently being overwhelmed. So it's pretty remarkable to me.
Luis, it's pretty well known, at least among most conservatives, that the left likes to create their own narrative. What are your thoughts on Biden's recent press conference? Because in the press conference, it seemed like he simultaneously said people are coming because they like him, there's no surge at all, and then everything is Trump's fault. I don't quite understand how those three narratives can be seen as a cohesive reality. So what are your thoughts on that, and why? Why is this taking place? Why has this become such a huge part of Democratic policy, or I would say the Democratic Party's policy, when it's obviously creating not only issues for Americans, it's creating issues for immigrants, and it's really putting the power and the finances in the hands of the cartel?
Yeah, so I'll tell you this, Jacqueline. It's quite clear that the current White House does not have a emergency in their administration. Mercedes is a communications expert, so I think to me it's quite clear that the current administration is not cohesive in their messaging. President Biden, in that same press conference that you just said that, it's, I guess, is a compliment that people are, because I'm a nice guy. The same guy also said that there is no crisis in the border. The same guy also said that the reason why people are coming is because people usually come during winter months. It's like, which one is it? I know conservatives have been highlighting the fact that President Biden is not very, is not comprehensive in terms of like his messaging and the way he speaks. And people often tell me that me as an immigrant, speak better English than Biden does, and my speech is clear than.
Is that a frequent compliment you get, Luis? It's very true, but is that something that people say to you on a routine basis?
It is, and and I used to take that and run with it. It's like eloquent than the current president.
What I was gonna say, when are you running for president?
Well, I cannot run for president because I was not in this country.
Right.
So, but it's and I won't take this comment lightly. It's a pretty scary thing to see the current president being unable to sort of like state a comprehensive, talking points. The basic talking points, like which one is it? Which one is the principles that you're holding? What's happening, or what's like the main messaging? And I think it's pretty remarkable to me.
Why do you think that this is the current administration's policy?
What do you mean? Why do I think which one is it, or why do you think they hold principles?
Sorry, you cut out a little bit, but why do you think that the Biden administration has essentially opened up the border? What is the value there? Who is this adding value to? I mean, I have my theories, I have my thoughts, but I mean, what's the value in it?
Yeah, so I have two different theories, and one of them it's the feel good. We all know that President Trump was a tough on immigration, tough on crime, president, and there's no question about that. And I think what President Biden is trying to be the nice guy. He's trying to make everyone feel good, about his policies. Regardless of the fact that President Obama, for example, was quite tough on immigration when he first got elected. That's people often ignore that. And I think that's one of the main theories that I have. It's that he wants people to feel good. After all, he ran for president because he wanted to fix the soul of the nation, as if the nation is currently breaking apart. Even though we're quite divided, I think there is no greater country, and there's no question about that. The second argument that the conservatives hold is that the Democratic Party often benefits from Hispanic votes. And President Biden, for example, one of his first actions as president was sending a massive amnesty bill to Congress on his first day of the presidency. Sending a message to undocumented immigrants that he's here to protect you, and he is here to provide you a pathway to citizenship, despite the fact that President Trump attempted multiple times to work with the DNC to pass comprehensive immigration reform. It was President Trump who offered a pathway to citizenship to DACA recipients. It was Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer who actually rejected the offer. So when people often talk to me about, some of the rhetoric and I have to people, President Trump was willing to work with the Democrats to pass a comprehensive immigration reform bill that protected the border and was fair to those people who were trying to come into our country. So, it's really up to the viewers and the listeners to decide, which one they think it's the most accurate. But those are the two theories that I currently have.
Luis, kind of playing off that second theory here for a moment, and this is something I will talk about more independently. I'm not going to put all of this on you, but something that, actually the reason that I began re-engaging with politics is I felt that the far left was manipulating and using the very people it was claiming to protect. Specifically in the case of BLM, where, they're claiming to protect Black Americans, and yet they're using them for a larger political agenda and re-victimizing that population ultimately. We've seen this recently in the Georgia shooting where, law enforcement does not believe that it was a racially motivated shooting. This is, and I'm not condoning the shooting. I'm just saying, it is not believed that it was a racially motivated shooting. And yet what we see in all the major papers is race, that this was a hate crime, it was a racial issue, and now there's a rallying cry to mobilize a large group of people in the name of racial fear. And now what we have is this border issue where literally the claim is let's, welcome in Latinos and Latinas, let's make things easier for them, let's help them get a path to citizenship. And yet what we see is trafficking, we see the cartels, we see inhumane conditions. I can't help but feel like there is this pattern of claiming to protect and then manipulating the very people that the left is claiming to protect. And that, to me personally, is very disturbing and really disgusting. And we're seeing this with the implementation of media. We're seeing this with leaders' comments. I mean, is this Is this a trend that people should be aware of and concerned about? How does that play into this cancel culture rhetoric?
Yeah, I think it is a trend from the Democratic Party. I was recently talking about the DACA recipients. I have to remind people. President Trump, when he first got elected, he sort of ended DACA as it existed as an executive, and he gave a deadline to elected officials in Congress to pass legislation that provided a pathway to citizenship to those DACA recipients. President Trump met with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer multiple times to talk about a comprehensive immigration reform. All President Trump was asking for was for funding, to create the border. Nancy Pelosi, in an attempt to, play games with the minds of DACA recipients and to take a gamble, said, you know what, we're not going to give you money for your border. President Trump, ended up getting the money. She said, we're not going to give you the money, and we're going to wait until the midterm election in 2018 to see if we can get, gain power in the House of Representatives. And they did. And that was a gamble that she took. However, who were the people suffering? The DACA recipients were sort of like in the air, throughout those years, despite the fact that President Trump was willing to work with, the Democratic officials to pass a comprehensive reform. So I often tell people, you need to certainly analyze the policies and just forget about the rhetoric and sort of like ask yourself what people are doing. When I was talking to a few friends of mine who happened to be undocumented, and they told me, whoa, President Biden sent an amnesty bill to the Congress. So that's a good thing. And my question to them was, well, I think this is an example of like the, feel good rhetoric. The question is like, is President Biden working with the GOP to sort of like analyze those policies? Is there a potential pathway for that, for reform or bill to become law? I don't think President Biden needs to work with the GOP in order for him to those undocumented immigrants who are in the U.S. And who have paid taxes, who have not committed crimes, and who are legitimate, willing to, become American citizens while also following the law, and they don't have that. Senator Melendez, I think, is the one who was in charge of that legislation. So what's happening? It's the senator meeting with the GOP to talk about a bipartisan fair reform. I don't think so. So people, Hispanics and those undocumented immigrants need to ask themselves, what is the Democratic Party doing to sort of like work with the GOP to pass something that is tangible, that is, fair, and has a potential of becoming law instead of all this like, feel good rhetoric and talking points from the DNC.
Luis, you're well educated, you're well read. Where can viewers and listeners go to find this information for themselves? The mainstream media is not covering it. We see the same headline across 20 different platforms. Where do you get your information?
Yes, so El American is a bilingual news organization. We have been working tirelessly to cover immigration reform, the current border crisis. So I highly recommend the viewers to go to elamerican.com and subscribe to our newsletter and sort of keep track with us. Also follow us on Twitter. And even also, take a look at Gap Freedom too. Gap Freedom also takes advantage of some of the, sort of like the hidden reports that people are not paying attention to, and sort of like tries to gather information that is fair, that is accurate, and you guys provide that to your followers. So yeah, both Freedom and American for sure.
And Luis, last question to you. As viewers are processing this information, I think it can be very overwhelming. I mean, I live in San Diego. The convention center across the street is about to be turned into another facility for migrants because of all the overflow. So what can people do? How can people engage with these issues in a way that is positive in order to make change rather than just be stuck watching the headlines pass by?
Yeah, I mean, the main way to get involved is to sort of like move away from the talking points on cable news and actually speak to your neighbor and ask them how they feel. And also speak to your representatives and call your office and call and ask them, what are you doing to like fix these issues that are currently facing our southern border? And I think those are like the main principles people can get involved. Sort of like move away from like mainstream media and the main points that everyone has been sharing on social media and the mainstream media, and sort of like talk to your neighbor and speak to your representative and ask them exactly what are they doing to handle the situation. And that is whether is your representative conservative or a Democrat. That's irrelevant. Ask them, are you working with your Congress to sort of like fix this issue? And that should be a bipartisan issue.
Thank you, Luis. Appreciate having you on today. Appreciate the time. Look forward to chatting again here soon.
Thank you, Jacqueline, for having me.
Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Luis. I always enjoy talking with Luis because he is an absolute wealth of information. His work underneath the Trump campaign has given him a great inside knowledge as to the former administration's policies when it comes to immigration, and also just his wealth of knowledge moving forward as he is a researcher. So we're definitely going to have him back, but a quick recap on some of the issues that we were talking about. So with the Trump administration, there was a lot of immigration reform that made it far less incentivized for people to come across the border. One of the primary changes that did that was moving from Obama's catch and release policy to a policy that required people to wait in Mexico before their papers were processed. So to put this in a little bit of context, if somebody was to come over the border and they were trying to get a green card under the Obama administration, they would have been given a court date and a slip and then been allowed or released into the country and expected to return voluntarily for that court date. Statistically, it was not successful. Most of these migrants went rogue and then became illegals inside the country. Now, with the Trump administration, he had worked out a policy with the president of Mexico where those who are waiting for their court date and their papers to be processed would wait in Mexico rather than the US. This would ensure that they would come to their court date rather than just being dispersed in the US at large. This policy and many others was reversed by the Biden administration, along with just very vague language and promises that, as we saw earlier, the president of Mexico referred to as this essentially false hope that the Biden administration put forward that these families and these people are going to be able to enter the US. And we have these families coming at large, but with that and with that extreme demand in population, we are seeing such an increase in trafficking, we are seeing an increase in cartel activity, we are seeing terrorists, people on terrorist watch lists crossing the border through the southern border. So this is not just Mexican immigrants. These are people from Central America as well as from the Middle East and all over the world who are coming and using this mass overload that's overloading our systems in order to enter the US. Now, there are a number of different issues that we're going to recap here, but one quick thing that I really want to note at this point: the world knows what's happening, and yet the US citizens do not. And that is not because the information isn't out there. It's because the mainstream media largely is not covering this issue, and our leaders are denying to recognize it because they don't want to take responsibility for their actions. The Biden administration has put a gag order on media at the border and has recently just altered that gag order in order to allow them into the facilities that are still operating, but not into the facilities that are maxed and overloaded. And yet we see video footage leaking out from these facilities where they smell like urine, they smell like vomit, and people are literally sleeping stacked on top of each other because there are not beds. This is a problem, and the world knows what's going on, and the world is exploiting what is taking place here. Not everyone in the world, but you know what I'm talking about. While the American people do not know. That is a concern in and of itself. And we're going to deal with the border crisis, but that is a concern. And Ugh. It is so, I know that many of you have experienced this, but it is so exhausting to see these patterns and to have the need to discuss truth, and yet you go about in the day-to-day and many people do not know what is taking place in the world around them. And we as people have individual responsibilities, but our leaders in governance, they have a responsibility. The media, they have a responsibility, and they are failing in that regard. So back to the border crisis, back to another area where there is extreme failure and an issue that is cause for extreme concern. So I mentioned there is the issue with terrorism, that there are those on the terrorist watch list that are crossing the border. There is also the concern of COVID-19. Many of these people, a very high percentage, are testing positive for COVID-19, and they're not even tested until later on in the processing. And so COVID is being spread rampant through these facilities where people are well beyond max capacity. And so there's a health crisis. Our entire country has pretty much been locked down. Biden has been trying to lock things down. He talks about, everybody has to have their masks, stay at home. We see with these Democrat-run states, I'm in California, I'm in San Diego, in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, where Governor Wolf, Governor Whitmer, Governor Cuomo in New York, all of these governors have been locking down their states due to COVID, and yet we are allowing thousands of people to cross the border who are largely infected with COVID. So talk about a health concern. The facility across the street from me is about to become yet another facility that is being used to house unaccompanied minors. So it's just insanity, and it's illogical based on the rhetoric and the policies that are being put forth. There's a complete incongruence, except I think there's a linchpin, and we'll get to that in a moment. This is actually mind-blowing. You think about where we are in history. Nobody expected 2020. And then we all go into 2021 kind of excited and kind of okay, how's this going to turn out? And it just keeps going. But we'll get to the linchpin in a minute. I want to stay on the border crisis. We'll get to the linchpin in a minute. But it just keeps going, and we're seeing a pattern. So, tax monies, U.S. tax dollars are being used to now house migrants in hotels. I do think that is far more humane, and we want things to be humane, but what would actually be the best is to close down the border. It would be best to close down the border right now. So here are the different angles. Here are the different angles that we're looking at, and I've got to put my tea over here. I'm going to spill it all over myself again. But we have a humanitarian crisis where we have people coming up from Central America. We have children coming up unaccompanied by their parents. We have, because of this mass movement of vulnerable people, we have increase in trafficking. There are children who are coming over with tags and bracelets and instructions on their attached to their clothing. There's an increase in trafficking around these vulnerable populations. Also, because of this influx that's not able to be processed, we also have the cartel that's able to exploit that for drug movements. So, I haven't even dealt with how this is detrimental to the U.S. infrastructure yet. We haven't even gotten there yet. And what we're looking at is this group of vulnerable people who are easily exploited, and they're coming into these holding facilities that are completely inhumane conditions because our system is overloaded based on the false promise of a weak presidency. And then we look at how is this actually going to impact the U.S.? We've got this whole humanitarian issue over here. How's that actually impact U.S. citizens? Well, to begin with, tax increases, to begin with, health crisis with increase in COVID cases and unchecked unquarantined individuals, which I am not for the lockdowns, but I am also not for opening up the border to a number of people who are infected with the pandemic. We also have, talk about job issues. We've got all these issues with the minimum wage. Our economy is already taxed. Taxed in the sense of fatigued, not just taxed in the sense of increased taxes. So we have all of these elements in the current U.S. infrastructure that are exhausted and weakened based on the past year's political climate. And I'm not talking about the Trump presidency. I'm talking about the political climate at large. Everything from the BLM riots to the pandemic, you name it. The UFOs that were released, the information that was released in 2020, like the craziness of 2020, the U.S. infrastructure is exhausted and is dealing with China. And then we have this influx of all of these things that are happening that are going to create a great stressor on an already weakened system. So we have these two sides of the same coin where nobody is benefiting from this except the traffickers, except the cartel. Mexico's government is not excited about this. Who is benefiting? So we've already identified the primary benefactors of this policy. It's not the families that are separated. It's not the kids who are in these holding pens. So what is the Biden administration doing? Like why? Is it literally because he has dementia? Or, there are so many people around him that at least are coherent or so they would seem. So here's the pattern that I see. And I'm hearing this echoed in other corners, so I know it's not just like me in my little San Diego apartment, the Democrats, they're scary. That was weird, I'm sorry. But I know it's not just in my head. So here's the pattern that I'm seeing. The House just passed H.R. 1. We've spoken about this in previous episodes. House Resolution 1 is a resolution that was put forth in order to completely change election law in the United States. But not only to change the election law, but actually shift the infrastructure away from the diffusion of powers that we see in the Constitution and to centralize that authority in the House of Representatives on how elections are to be run. First off, you don't really want your elected officials determining how elections are ran. It doesn't make sense. It's you don't want Putin writing election law in Russia. That's a really kind of a bad example, but it works because we see how this happens. The same person stays in power over and over again when they're able to change the rules in their favor. That's why we have a constitutional system where everybody, including the government officials, are beholden to that rule of law. And yet House Resolution 1, through the power of the purse, through financial incentive, extreme financial incentive, shifts the power of running federal elections from the state, from the individual states, into Congress. With the far left, there's this complete weakening of laws, but the pattern that we have been seeing over the past number of years, but specifically over the 2020, 2021, hellhole, whatever you want to call it, what we've been seeing as a pattern for the far left is a manipulation of the vulnerable in the name of protecting the vulnerable. And that is sickening. That's just straight sickening. And so we've seen this where, Black Lives Matter comes out and says, I'm going to protect you, we're going to save you, we're going to help you. And yet in the very same breath, you can never be saved, you can never be helped because you're less than. And you will always be seen as less than. Victims, when you victimize someone, and I'm not just talking about someone who is victimized by an experience. I'm talking about someone who takes on a victim mindset. When you push that mindset of you will always be a victim, you will always be less than, you can control a population. And Black Lives Matter is weakening the Black community. And there are many Black leaders who are saying this. Bishop Aubrey Shines, Candace Owens. Many people are starting to come forward and say, this is not true Black America. They do not represent us. They are not helping us. And yet you see this agenda pushed by the far left, supported by these strong Democrat governors, where again, Governor Whitmer is marching with BLM. And there's burning, and there's rioting, and there's looting, and there's destruction. Racial injustices are real, but this is not the solution. What this does is it wields a population for another political agenda. And that is so deceitful. And we're seeing that again, this increasing cancel culture, race card agenda, where there are issues and grievances that are coming up not related to race at all. And yet, oh, it's a race issue, it's a race issue, it's a race issue. And it's creating this intentional division that allows for those in centralized power to control people. And so as we have this influx of people crossing the border, the far left is saying, we are humane, we are the ones solving the problem, we are fixing the grievances of the Trump administration, and yet what these policies are doing is they are increasing trafficking, they are increasing drug movement, they are promoting the separation of families as people are making a 22-day extremely dangerous journey. People are dying, people are getting sick, and they're saying, oh, we are humane. No, you want their votes. You want their votes. And that is wrong. That is wrong. So that's what I have to say about that. I am personally grieved by this. And I am personally frightened by this. I mean, the ramifications of how this could impact people around the world, as well as the infrastructure of our nation. And our nation is a huge part of keeping security in other nations. Like the domino effect of this could be catastrophic. But I always, not for the sake of having silver lining and not for the sake of being trite, I always want to end with hope. Because I believe that hope is powerful when it is placed in the right place. And my hope is in Jesus Christ. And with that, because of that, I believe that as long as there is truth, and there is always truth, there is the ability to turn to that truth and to engage in powerful change. It is not too late to change the border policies. It is not too late for us to call upon the government for government accountability. I was watching an interview earlier today, or a press conference rather, and a representative from Miami spoke. And forgive me, I do not remember her name at the moment, but it was very, very powerful, and I'd encourage you to go and look it up. But she was saying, we have to stop this. These are our children who are being trafficked. And it's a very real issue. I saw, another clip of a teacher who is talking about how the cartel will stand, members of the cartel will stand along the river and flashlights and shoot flashlights over at the kids and yell at them and say, I'll pick you up after school. Do you want to come to a party later? Like there is a harassing, there's a breaking down that's taking place. And so our job, our role is to take responsibility for ourselves. I can't do what Biden can do, but I can do what I can do. I can call my representative. I can reach out to my mayor. I'm in San Diego. We have facilities that are getting set up for migrants here. I can love on those people. I can, go and help minister to those people, take water. They need our help as well. But this is a crisis that has been created by the Biden administration. And they are diffusing responsibility, and they are failing to address it. In the very same breath, they're saying there is no crisis, this is normal, and this is Trump's fault. And along with that, I can't believe it, David, if you can just pull it up in the background here, but Biden's quote, I guess they're coming because I'm a nice guy. I'm so glad they think I'm a nice guy. You know, this is unacceptable behavior, and we need to hold them accountable. So the things we can do, we can reach out to our representatives. We can engage in the border issue if we're along the border ourselves. How can we support Border Patrol? We can share content, real content from the border through social media with our friends and family, because the mainstream media isn't covering these issues. So those are just a few ways that we can get involved. I love you all. I love this nation. I love this nation. It is a beautiful nation. And it's a nation of promises, true promises. And that's to be distinguished from the false hope that's been created, because there is a way for people to come here. And as Tony Gonzalez from Homeland Security said, you know, we are a nation of immigrants, but we're also a nation of laws. And this is me continuing with that, but we need to keep those laws in place in order to be able to promote a place that is safe for immigrants to come, a place that continues to be a refuge. So thank you so much for tuning in today. I'm excited to see you next week. Next week I will have my puppy, so he'll be making his debut entrance. But I love you all. God bless America. Follow me on Instagram. Follow me on Twitter. We'll see you next week.